As a Viking fan, do you often find yourself being attacked when you openly admit that you think Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback? Hear this video coming up next. Welcome to Skull World, brought to you by Minnesota Sports Talk. I'm your host, Dave. You can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at Skull World. Now make sure you hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment. I want to hear what you have to say, especially about this topic. Let me have it. I want to hear it. Leave a comment that enters you in my contest. I have the rules in the description below. I want to give free stuff. If you like free stuff, I'm giving it away on the Packer game. Get me to 500 subs. You've got me to 400. If they're doing that monetary value increases, I want to give at least $50 away in merchandise. It's free stuff coming to you from Minnesota Sports Talk. Let's get started on Kirk Cousins. How often have you just had a conversation and someone says Kirk Cousins is trash, Kirk Cousins is average, Kirk Cousins will never win the big game, Kirk will be Kirk? You just hear it nonstop. It almost makes you want to, be a relative and support the guy. I don't know. It's just, it's like the contradiction is so real. I just got off a text message back and forth, someone trying to convince me that Kirk Cousins is not above average. Get that? Not above average. That he says, well, you keep talking like he's elite, or you keep talking like he's great. And I said, those were words that don't come out of my mouth. Can he be great? Yeah, he's proven that because he's won offensive player of the month at least 2 times that I know about. 2016, 2019. 2 different teams. On 2 different teams, he's won player of the month. Oh, he's just streaky. Well, streaky would imply that he is bad for a long period of time and good for a long period of time. He is good for a longer period of time than he's ever bad. He may have bad games. He may have 2 back-to-back, but you don't see long stretches of Kirk Cousins being a bad quarterback. You don't do that. So even the word streaky is not to be said. In fact, he is more consistent than most quarterbacks ever. In many cases, there's elite quarterbacks that just never seem to do bad, but even Tom Brady has been bad on occasion. You've seen guys have bad games. It just happens. But again, he's had longer stretches of good than he's ever had longer stretches of bad. Now, let's start. I'm going to start year 2018. Why didn't Kirk Cousins take us to the Super Bowl? Well, historically, teams that go to the NFC title games don't even go to the playoffs the next year. It's almost like clockwork. Well, when we change offensive coordinator, Schumer goes off. Now we have Kirk Cousins already on I don't know how many different coordinators. Now he's got a new one, D. Fliplo, who happened to get fired that season. Well, we had, what about, here's the thing. Kirk Cousins, you ever hear this? Kirk Cousins has to be perfect. Everything around him has to be perfect. So we went 8-7-1 that year. We were 1 game away from making the playoffs. We just needed to beat Chicago, I think even at home, and we didn't do it. We went 8-7-1 and missed the playoffs. Chicago didn't have anything to play for, but that was a year Chicago was actually really good and had a really good defense. So it was a tough game, and they played to win. They came to win. They played all their starters. They didn't give up. They were a playoff team, a good team, and a good defense, and they beat us fair and square. We didn't make the playoffs. Well, Kirk Cousins had to have everything be perfect. Well, he had an offensive line coach die, one of the best in the game. Our offensive line was arguably the worst offensive line in Vikings history that year. I'm not exaggerating. I don't know an offensive line off the top of my head that was as bad as 2018. It was horrible. It was just beyond horrible. And we had the league's either like second or third worst rushing attack. I might have even been last. I don't have the numbers up in front of me, but you can check. What was Dalvin Cook was still recovering from his knee injury. He was a year removed from that. It was the second year of the league. But I don't necessarily blame him. I blame DeFilippo and his offense that we didn't have a good running game. And it had something to do with the fact that our offense was the worst. Our offensive line was the worst offensive line in the history of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, actually, was Kirk Cousins, doubter in 2018 because when we did have a chance to win, he got a strip sack or he tried to win it on first down and threw a pick when we're trying a last 2-minute drive to go ahead, and on the second play of the drive, he throws a pick or gets a strip sack on him. So I didn't want that to happen anymore, and I was still seeing that in 2019, but I'm still talking about 2018. If you hear the thing that Kirk Cousins just has to have everything perfect. No, sir. We need it to be average. We needed an average offensive line. We needed an average rushing attack. One of those being average. We just needed one of those to be average, and we would have made the playoffs that year. And probably even been a 10 or 11 or win team if we just had an average rushing attack or an average offensive line. We just need the other aspects of our team to be average. What happens when it's average? 2019 happens. Kirk Cousins, go look, MVP candidate. There's articles about him being MVP candidate in 2019. Kirk Cousins are statistically probably worst year of the four, statistically, although I felt it was pretty good because he was really efficient that year, 2019. But we were an average defense, 15, and we actually stepped back. So we went from a top 5 defense to a top 15 defense, and we made the playoffs. Why? Because we had a good rushing attack that year, and our offensive line wasn't as historically bad as it was the year before. So Kirk Cousins didn't need to have everything perfect around him. He just needed it to be average around him. So if someone says he needs to be perfect, no, we needed it to be average. Well, 2020, COVID, no home field advantage. Our defense is decimated. We lost everybody. They were getting old anyways. They probably wouldn't have been as good. We bring in some free agents. 2020, Danielle Hunter gets hurt. Defense, bad. 28th ranked bad. If it's not 28th, it's either 27th or 29th or 30th even maybe. I don't know. But it was that bad. It was bottom 15, 20% of the league. We won, I think we went 8-8 that year. 8-8 in 2020. We didn't need, or 7, I forget. Forgive me on that. I'm ranting. 2020, we just needed the defense to be average, not perfect. We still had a bad offensive line. So if our defense was 15th in the league and we still had that bad offensive line, still 3 years in a row with a bad offensive line, none worse than 2018, but 2020, we still have a bad offensive line. Our defense is ranked 28th or worse in the league. We just needed the defense to be average. So that crap about Kirk Cousins needs everything to be perfect around him. No, he just needs it to be average. Now look at 2022. Well, why didn't we win the playoffs? Why didn't we go to the playoffs? Well, we were one game away and lost to the Lions on a 96-yard drive by Jared Goff of the Lions to win the game. We don't make the playoffs. Kirk Cousins is number 8, not 58. Well, what about that defense? That was the historically worst defense in Vikings history. And why do I say that? I got numbers to back it up. There's a statistic to last 2-minute drill, last 2 minutes of the half. We gave up more points than any team since that statistic has been recorded. The year 2000. Since then, 686 teams have been recorded with that stat. So every team, every year, adds up to 686 teams. Last 2 minutes of the half, last 2 minutes of the game, we were ranked 686 out of 686. That is the worst defense in history of that stat. So arguably the worst defense in Vikings history. Name me a worse defense in 2-minute drill. Forget yards given up or points given up. It was that bad. That was the worst defense I known in my lifetime. And we had a couple bad ones in the past 20 years, but that statistic is the worst ever. In the same argument, people will say Vikings should have been 12-5, but because of the defense, it was that bad we didn't make the playoffs. But if we would have just had that other quarterback over there, say one from Seattle that won 5 games last year, if we had him, we would have made the playoffs. He would have overcome the historically worst defense in Viking history. I'm not exaggerating. It was that bad. 686 out of 686, and that wasn't even close of the amount of points they gave up in that amount of time compared to the 687 teams in that 21-year span. Folks, we didn't need that defense to be perfect. We needed it to be average. I would have took mediocre, and we win 10 games last year. If it's average, we win 12 games last year. Our offense was that good despite the run mandate, the nepotism at offensive coordinator. We could have been great last year if our defense was just average. Rams were 15th ranked defense in the league last year. They weren't elite. They weren't perfect. They were just average, and Stafford led the league in interceptions. He threw 3 picks against us. He wasn't perfect. They still beat us because our defense is that terrible. 686 terrible. 686 out of 686 terrible. So folks, we don't need everything perfect around Kirk Cousins. We just need it to be average. That is my rant. Kirk Cousins, I'm sorry, is a good quarterback. And at times, player of the month. Which means he was the best player in the league for an entire month. Twice. Not many quarterbacks do that. So, hey, I've said Kirk Cousins will be the 8th best quarterback this year. I do agree with my co-host who says he's an MVP candidate that I'm on Purple Pocket Podcast. MC Rap, shout out to you. You inspired this video. The fact that you say he's an MVP candidate at the same time that he's an average quarterback and he's a system quarterback, it is not the most valuable system. It's the most valuable player. So, hey, I look forward to arguments in the future about this. Skull Vikings, I'm back in the Kirk train. Go Kirk Cousins. Let's do this. Skull Vikings. See you next time. Minnesota Sports Talk. I'm your host, Dave. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Skull World. Click like, and subscribe, but definitely leave a comment. I want to hear about you, why you think Kirk Cousins needs everything perfect around him. He's average, he's blah, he's nothing. Or, hey, let's just put an average defense out there, an average offensive line, and see what happens. Skull Vikings, see you next time. I'm out.